March 2019. A Subaru engineering facility in Otagunma, Japan. Chief engineer Masuo Takatsu stands before a wall of photographs spanning 3 decades. Each image shows a different iteration of the same basic design. The EJ20, Subaru's iconic boxer 4-cylinder, the engine that built the company's performance reputation. Behind him, a room full of engineers who've spent their entire careers refining this engine, improving it, perfecting it, making it faster, more efficient, more reliable with each generation. Takatsu clears his throat. Effective with the 2020 model year, EJ20 production will cease. The FA20DIT and FA24 engines will replace it across all applications. Silence. Then one engineer speaks up. The EJ20 still sells. The STI is still popular. Why are we discontinuing it? Takatsu doesn't look at the photographs. He looks at a different document. Emissions compliance charts, fuel economy regulations, safety standards, because we can't make it comply with 2020 emission standards without spending $200 million on development. And corporate has decided that money is better spent on crossovers. But the EJ20 is Subaru, someone protests. It's our identity. It's what makes us different. Takatsu finally turns to face them. The EJ20 was Subaru, past tense. The market has changed. Rally racing doesn't sell cars anymore. Performance doesn't matter when customers want safety ratings and fuel economy. The FA series is modern, efficient, and compliant. The EJ20 is none of those things. So we're just giving up? No, Takatsu says quietly. We're accepting reality. The EJ20 had a good run, 30 years, but technology moves on, and we need to move with it. This is the story of the EJ20, the engine that defined Subaru's golden age, that won rally championships and created a cult following, and why killing it was the hardest decision Subaru ever made. Not because the engine failed, but because the world changed around it, and Subaru couldn't justify keeping it alive just for nostalgia. The engine born from desperation. To understand why Subaru killed the EJ20, you need to understand why they built it in the first place. And the answer is survival. In 1989, Subaru was barely relevant. They sold all-wheel drive wagons to people in snowy climates. Their cars were reliable but boring, practical but utterly forgettable. Honda had VTEC, Nissan had the Skyline, Toyota had the Supra, and Subaru had all-wheel drive. But they had one thing going for them: rally racing. Subaru had been competing in the World Rally Championship since the 1980s with modest success. Not winning, but competitive enough to matter. In 1989, Subaru made a decision that would define their next 3 decades. They would go all in on rally, build a homologation special, create a rally weapon that would beat Lancia, Toyota, and Mitsubishi, and use that success to transform Subaru's image from boring A cars to performance brand. But they had a problem: money. Subaru didn't have Honda's budget or Toyota's resources. They couldn't afford to develop an exotic engine from scratch. They had to be clever with what they already had. The solution was the EJ series, a new family of boxer 4-cylinder engines designed to replace Subaru's aging EA series. The base EJ20 was a 2.0-liter naturally aspirated engine making about 150 horsepower. Nothing special. But Subaru's engineers saw potential. The boxer layout, with opposed cylinders, meant a low center of gravity. The engine could sit lower in the chassis, improving handling, and the basic design was overbuilt for its naturally aspirated application. Someone asked the question that would change Subaru's history: what if we turbocharged it? The accidental monster. They almost didn't build. When Subaru's engineers first turbocharged the EJ20 in 1990, they were conservative. They targeted 250 horsepower, enough to be competitive in Group A rally racing. Nothing crazy. The first prototype made 237 horsepower at 6,500 RPM. Good. But one engineer noticed something interesting in the data. The engine wasn't stressed. Cylinder pressures were well within safe limits. Temperatures were manageable. How much boost are we running? Someone asked. 12 psi. What happens if we go higher? At 14 psi, it made 265 horsepower. At 16 psi, 285. At 18 psi, the engine made 310 horsepower and still showed no signs of distress. The engineers looked at each other with growing excitement. They'd stumbled onto something unexpected. The EJ20's boxer design, with its opposed pistons, meant the engine block was inherently rigid. There was no cylinder head trying to lift off under boost pressure. The forces were balanced. This meant the EJ20 could handle boost levels that would require expensive reinforcement in inline engines, not because Subaru had designed it that way, but because the boxer architecture accidentally provided massive structural advantages for forced induction. But there was a problem: the Japanese 280 horsepower gentleman's agreement. Subaru couldn't advertise more than 280 horsepower without breaking the informal pact that kept the government from regulating performance cars. So they did what everyone did. They lied. The turbocharged EJ20, when it debuted in the 1992 Impreza WRX, was rated at 240 horsepower. Later versions were rated at 280. But everyone who dynoed them knew the truth. The engines made 260 to 290 horsepower, depending on the variant. Subaru was underrating by 10 to 20 horsepower as a buffer, but the real potential was much higher, and it wouldn't take long for people to find out. The rally domination that built a legend. Between 1993 and 2003, Subaru won 3 World Rally Championship manufacturers titles and 3 drivers' championships with Colin McRae, Richard Burns, and Petter Solberg. The EJ20-powered Imprezas destroyed everything. They beat Mitsubishi's Evos, they beat Toyota's Celicas, they beat Ford's Focus. The engine Subaru built from desperation became the most successful rally engine of the 1990s. And it wasn't just winning, it was dominating. McRae's driving combined with the EJ20's power and Subaru's all-wheel drive system created a package that was almost unbeatable on gravel and snow. Every victory was proof that Subaru's engineering was world-class. Every podium finish sold WRXs and STIs. The rally program became the foundation of Subaru's performance identity. But here's what made the EJ20 special. It wasn't the most powerful rally engine. Mitsubishi's Ford G63T made comparable power. It wasn't the most advanced. Honda's engines had VTEC. What made the EJ20 special was its character. The boxer rumble, the instant turbo response, the feeling that you were driving something raw and mechanical and connected. Subaru engineers hadn't just built a fast engine, they'd built an engine with personality. And that personality became Subaru's identity. The modification culture Subaru accidentally created. By 1995, the tuning community had discovered what Subaru already knew. The EJ20 was massively underrated and incredibly strong. Basic modifications yielded shocking results. A cold air intake, exhaust, and boost controller would take a 240 horsepower in a WRX to 280 to 300 horsepower. Easily, reliably, on the stock bottom end, more aggressive tuning could push 350 to 400 horsepower on stock internals with upgraded turbo and fuel system. Built engines with forged internals were making 500 to 600 horsepower. Extreme builds were pushing past 800. But unlike the Ford G63T or 2 JZG-TE, the EJ20 had a dark side, a flaw that would haunt Subaru for decades: Ringland failure. The EJ20's closed-deck design, while strong, created heat management issues. Under high boost and aggressive timing, the piston ring lands, the thin sections of the piston between the ring grooves would crack. The engine would lose compression, power would drop. Eventually, catastrophic failure. Early WRXs and STIs eating ringlands became common, not on stock cars driven gently, but on modified cars driven hard. The modification that unlocked 350 horsepower also created a failure point at 400 horsepower that Subaru couldn't easily solve. Subaru knew about the problem, they'd seen it in testing, but solving it required redesigning the pistons, which required redesigning the combustion chamber, which required expensive retooling. So they did the minimum. They strengthened the pistons slightly. They revised the tune to be more conservative. They added NOx sensors and ECU protection. But they didn't fundamentally solve the problem, because doing so would cost $50 to $80 million. And Subaru didn't have that money to spend on a low-volume performance engine. The STI that became too expensive. In 1994, Subaru released the Impreza WRX STI, the ultimate version of the EJ20, with 280 horsepower, underrated, upgraded turbos, better transmission, and track-focused suspension. It was a homologation special that defined the term giant killer. An STI cost $35,000 in the US market when it finally arrived in 2004. That's $58,000 in 2024 dollars. And for that money, you got a car that could embarrass Porsches and Corvettes. On a track, few cars under $100,000 could keep up with a properly driven STI. But the car came with compromises. The interior was basic. The ride was harsh. The fuel economy was terrible, 16 miles per gallon city. And the maintenance requirements were significant. Engine oil every 3,750 miles. Differential oil every 15,000 miles. Transmission oil every 30,000 miles. This was a car for enthusiasts, people who understood what they were buying, who accepted the compromises because the performance was worth it. But by the mid-2000s, the market was changing. Customers wanted performance and comfort. They wanted fast cars that were also daily drivable. The STI's hardcore nature, which had been its strength, was becoming a weakness. Meanwhile, the competition was evolving. The Mitsubishi Evo was faster. The Nissan 370Z was more powerful. Even the Mazda RX-8 offered a more refined package. And the biggest threat of all, hot hatches. The VW Golf R, the Ford Focus RS, the Honda Civic Type R. All of them offered STI-level performance with better interiors, better fuel economy, and lower prices. The STI was still loved by hardcore enthusiasts, but hardcore enthusiasts don't buy enough cars to justify a model's existence. The crisis nobody saw coming. In 2008, the global financial crisis hit. Auto sales collapsed. Subaru, a small manufacturer compared to Toyota and Honda, was hit hard. But unlike most manufacturers, Subaru had a lifeline. Their partnership with Toyota and their focus on practical all-wheel drive vehicles kept them alive. Outback and Forester sales remained strong. The Schick's-Fien Crosstrek became a hit. Performance cars, not so much. STI sales dropped from 4,200 units in 2007 to 1,800 in 2009. The WRX held up better, but still saw declines. Subaru's executives faced a brutal reality. Their performance cars, the models that defined the brand's identity, were losing money. And in a survival crisis, you can't afford sentiment. But they didn't kill the STI, because the STI sold WRXS. The WRX sold IMPREZAS. The IMPREZA made people aware of Subaru, who then bought Foresters. The performance cars were loss leaders that drove brand awareness. So Subaru kept the EJ20 alive, but they stopped developing it. Between 2010 and 2019, the EJ20 received minimal updates, slightly revised tuning, minor refinements, but no fundamental improvements. While competitors were developing modern turbocharged engines with direct injection and advanced materials, Subaru was nursing a 30-year-old design. The EJ20 became outdated. Fuel economy was poor, emissions were high, and reliability, while good, wasn't class-leading anymore. Subaru was keeping the EJ20 alive on life support, waiting for the right moment to pull the plug. The emissions trap that sealed its fate. By 2015, Subaru faced an impossible problem. Global emissions regulations were tightening. Europe's Euro 6 standards, America's stricter EPA requirements, Japan's own tightening regulations. The EJ20, with its port injection and simple turbo system, couldn't meet these standards without major modifications. Specifically, direct injection would be required for efficiency. A more sophisticated turbo system would be needed for response. The combustion chamber would need redesigning for cleaner burn. The entire engine management system would need modernization. Subaru's engineers estimated the cost, $180 to $220 million to make the EJ20 compliant with 2020 plus emission standards. And even then, it would barely meet requirements. It would never be class-leading in efficiency. Compare that to developing a new engine from scratch, $300 to $400 million. More expensive, but you'd get a modern engine that could last another 20 years. Or option 3, adapt an existing modern engine. The FA20, which Subaru had developed with Toyota for the BRZ, could be turbocharged and scaled up. Development cost $120 million. The math was brutal. Spending $200 million to update a 30-year-old engine made no sense when you could spend $120 million adapting a modern one. In 2016, Subaru made the decision. The EJ20 would be phased out. The FA20DIT, turbocharged FA20, would replace it in the WRX. And for the STI, they'd develop an FA24 with more displacement and power. The announcement came in 2019. Production would end in 2020. The EJ20, after 30 years, was done. The replacement that divided enthusiasts. When Subaru introduced the FA20DIT in the 2015 WRX, enthusiasts were cautiously optimistic. The specs looked good on paper, 268 horsepower from 2.0 liters. Better fuel economy, more low-end torque. But the first drive reviews were mixed. The FA20DIT was fast. Actually faster than the old EJ255 it replaced. But it felt different. The boxer rumble was muted. The power delivery was smoother, but less characterful. The engine felt refined and modern, not raw and mechanical. Enthusiasts split into camps. One side appreciated the modernization, better fuel economy, more reliable, easier to live with daily. These were people who wanted a fast car that was also practical. The other side hated it. Where was the character? Where was the rally car feel? The FA20DIT felt like an appliance, fast but soulless. And then there was the STI. Subaru kept the STI on the EJ257, the 2.5-liter variant of the EJ20, through 2021, 6 years after the WRX got the FA20DIT, because Subaru couldn't figure out how to make the FA24 work in the STI without compromising either performance or emissions compliance. The result was embarrassing. The 2021 WRX STI, Subaru's flagship performance car, had an engine architecture from 1989. Competitors were laughing. The Civic Type R had 306 horsepower. The Golf R had 315. The STI, still 310, same as it had been since 2004. In 2022, Subaru finally discontinued the STI entirely. No FA24 version, no replacement, just gone. The EJ20/257 had lasted so long that when Subaru finally killed it, they didn't have a replacement ready. They'd waited too long and lost the plot entirely. The cult following that refuses to die. But here's what Subaru didn't anticipate. Killing the EJ20 didn't kill demand for it. If anything, it intensified the cult following. Today, in 2024, clean EJ20-powered WRXs and STIs are selling for more than they cost new. A pristine 2006 STI sells for $40,000 to $50,000. That's more than its original $35,000 MSRP, even without adjusting for inflation. Why? Because enthusiasts recognize what's been lost. The EJ20's character, the rally heritage, the raw mechanical feel that modern turbocharged engines can't replicate. And the aftermarket is still thriving. Companies like Cobb, Perrin, and IAG, Import Alliance Group, still develop EJ20/257 parts. Built engines, turbo upgrades, the full catalog of performance parts that kept evolving even after Subaru abandoned the platform. IAG, which specializes in built EJ engines, reports building 200 to 300 engines annually. Each build costs customers $8,000 to $15,000. That's $1.6 to $4.5 million in annual revenue from an engine Subaru discontinued. Multiply that by dozens of engine builders worldwide, and you see the market Subaru walked away from. The EJ20 aftermarket generates tens of millions annually, money that could have been Subaru's if they'd supported the platform instead of abandoning it. The reliability problem nobody wants to admit. But there's a darker truth about the EJ20 that enthusiasts often ignore. For all its strengths, it had real, persistent problems that Subaru never fully solved. Ringland failure, as mentioned, was the most notorious. But there were others. Head gasket failure. The EJ25 variant particularly suffered from this. Between 2001 and 2009, head gasket failures were common enough that class action lawsuits were filed. Subaru's fix was inadequate. The problem persisted. Rod bearing wear. The EJ257's rod bearings were undersized for the power output. Under sustained high load, they'd wear prematurely. Spinning a rod bearing became a common failure mode for tracked STIs. Turbo oil supply issues. The top mount turbo location, while good for response, created oil drainage problems. Turbos would fail prematurely from oil coking and starvation. These weren't catastrophic flaws, but they were persistent issues that required expensive repairs and created a reputation for unreliability that Subaru couldn't shake. One former Subaru service manager explained, "We loved the EJ20 when it ran well, but we saw the failures, we knew the weak points, and we knew Subaru wasn't fixing them because the cost was too high for a low-volume engine." The FA20DIT has its issues too, but it's fundamentally more reliable because it's a modern design. The EJ20 was a 1989 engine trying to make 2015 power. The failures were inevitable. What Subaru won't admit. Today, when journalists ask Subaru about the EJ20's discontinuation, they get carefully crafted responses. The EJ series served us well for 3 decades. The FA series represents our commitment to modern, efficient performance. But talk to retired Subaru engineers, the ones who don't have to protect the brand, and you hear something different. "We wanted to keep developing the EJ20, one engineer admitted. We had plans for direct injection, variable valve lift, technology that could have kept it competitive. But corporate wouldn't fund it. They said the business case didn't exist. And they were right. From a business perspective, investing $200 million in a 30-year-old engine for a car that sold 3,000 units annually didn't make sense. But from an engineering perspective, from a heritage perspective, it was heartbreaking." Another engineer was more blunt. The EJ20 died because Subaru stopped being a performance company and became a crossover company. The Outback and Forester pay the bills. The WRX and STI were always vanity projects. When money got tight, the vanity projects got cut. We built our reputation on rally racing and the EJ20. Then we abandoned both because they didn't sell enough crossovers. That's the truth. Nobody wants to say out loud. The questions Subaru can't answer. Here's what haunts me about the EJ20 story. If the engine was so outdated and problematic, why does it command such loyalty and value? A clean EJ207, the Japanese market STI engine, sells for $8,000 to $12,000. That's triple what an FA20DIT costs. Clearly, enthusiasts prefer the old technology over the new. And here's the bigger question. What if Subaru had invested in EJ20 development instead of abandoning it? What if they'd added direct injection, variable valve timing, and modern materials? Could they have built a bridge between the EJ20's character and the FA20's efficiency? Or was the architecture fundamentally limited? Drop your take in the comments. Was Subaru right to kill the EJ20? Or did they murder their own identity to chase crossover profits? And here's what I really want to know. If Subaru announced tomorrow they were bringing back the EJ20 with modern technology but the same character, would you buy it? Or has the moment passed? Because maybe that's the real tragedy of the EJ20. Subaru built an engine that defined their golden age, rally championships, giant killer STIs, a performance reputation that punched above their size and budget. Then they abandoned it because the world changed, because emissions regulations tightened, because customers wanted crossovers more than sports cars, because keeping the EJ20 alive meant spending money that didn't generate returns. And in doing so, they lost something irreplaceable, not just an engine, but an identity. The idea that Subaru was the scrappy underdog that built rally weapons for the common man. The FA20DIT is better than the EJ20 in almost every measurable way. More power, better efficiency, more reliable. But measurable isn't everything. The EJ20 had something the FA20 doesn't: soul, character. A mechanical personality that made you feel connected to the car in a way modern engines can't replicate. And you can't quantify that on a spreadsheet. You can't justify it to shareholders. You can't make a business case for soul. So Subaru did what any rational company would do. They killed the soul to save the business. The EJ20 ended production in 2020, but on rally stages and back roads, at track days and in grassroots racing, it's still screaming that distinctive boxer howl, still proving that sometimes the old ways were the best ways. Subaru wanted to move forward, but thousands of enthusiasts chose to stay behind with the engine that made Subaru matter. Maybe they're the ones who got it right. This is the JDM Engine Archive. The EJ20 is dead. Long live the EJ20. Catch you next time.